Do you ever feel uneasy about the changes happening in our society today? Are you concerned or maybe even fearful about how immigration, cultural pluralism, and religious diversity are reshaping the very fabric of our national identity? Americanization means the process of becoming an American. It means civic incorporation, becoming a part of the polity, becoming one of us. But that does not mean conformity. We are more than a melting pot. We are a kaleidoscope. This is a quote from Barbara Jordan, civil rights icon and constitutional scholar. And it reminds us that being an American isn't about sameness, it's about shared purpose. It's about civic belonging. And it's about embracing the vibrant, refracted diversity that makes this country not just a place, but a promise. In today's episode, I am joined by two fellow braver angels, Will Harwood and Ibrahim Anli, for a powerful conversation about civic culture, national identity, and what it means to choose America, not just as a home, but as a story we live into together.
It was this living contract, and I'll quote Alex de Tocqueville, maybe not in an exactly worded form, but he says the greatest strength of Americans is their ability and willingness to face their shortcomings, to encounter their shortcomings. That has been just such a profound part of this.
I think that there's a fundamental optimism and sense of we rise to our challenges, whatever those are, as a country, and we find our way through. And to me, that's a fundamental American spirit, right? Like, we're going to be able to get through whatever the challenges are now today with polarization. I always say we don't choose. No American generation has ever sat down and chosen the challenges that it's confronting, but always we've risen to them.
It's just the story of another individual who, as you said, chooses this country as his home, and to a very large number of countries in the world, this whole idea of adopting that country as your home is a lot of technicalities. It's a matter of technicalities. It's not a matter of story or identity. Even if that happens, that happens in multiple generations. Not in the case of the United States. It is this living contract, way beyond technicalities.
I think part of the challenge that we have to do today is also ground ourselves so that we have that shared understanding of what the civic culture needs to be and how we can set that forward.
Two Americans, one natural born, one by choice. Different backgrounds and beliefs, coming together for a conversation about optimism, realism, and the living contract we all share as citizens. It's about grounding ourselves in civic culture, not as nostalgia, but as a forward-looking foundation. So whether you're feeling hopeful or uncertain, this discussion is for you. Let's roll that intro and get into this bonus DTH episode. Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate The Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The Derate The Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful Derate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. In today's conversation, Ibrahim Anli and Will Harwood discuss the complex balance between religious and cultural pluralism and American identity, particularly in this populist era. Ibrahim, as an immigrant, reflects on the concept of a living contract, an evolving civic creed that transcends legalities, reminding us that America's strength lies in its ability to self-correct and adapt. He emphasizes that America's unique power lies in its openness to newcomers, allowing for personal and religious freedom, a space where immigrants like him can find both refuge and opportunity. Will builds on this by underscoring the importance of grounding ourselves in the nation's founding principles, especially the Constitution. He points to the ongoing challenges of polarization and skepticism, but encourages an optimistic outlook rooted in historic resilience, reminding us that America's greatness is defined by its ability to confront adversity through open conversation. Together, Ibrahim and Will highlight that embracing both cultural pluralism and a shared commitment to foundational values is the key to overcoming division and ensuring the American experiment continues to thrive. Let's get into it with my friends, Will and Ibrahim. Here we go. Ibrahim Anli and Will Harwood, thank you so much for joining me for this special episode of the Derate the Hate podcast. I appreciate you guys being here today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great to be with you guys.
Yeah, so excited for this conversation. You guys have both been part of Braver Angels for a while now and know how important it is to have these wonderful conversations freely, fully, without fear. And Will, when you came to me with the idea that there was a relationship that you had been building with Ibrahim and then this topic of religious pluralism and how that worked with American identity in this kind of populist era. It was such an interesting idea, and I thought it was such an important concept that we should bring this conversation between the two of you to the DTH listeners, because this is one of those conversations and one of those things that I think is on a lot of people's minds, especially today in this era that we're in. And for the two of you to step up and be willing to have that conversation right now is incredible. So thank you both very much for being here today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Wilk, for having us. I'm excited for the conversation that we can jump into. And I'll just say, when Ibrahim and I were talking about this originally, one of the things that I love so much about Braver Angels is that it brings you together with really great Americans, people that are looking to build and to take on the challenge of polarization, to restart the conversations, to engage, to get together. And Ibrahim, from the first moment that I met him, has always struck me in the meetings where I walk away and I leave with thoughts that are provoking and things that stick with me. So I can go back all the way through probably to the first time, Ibrahim, that you and I met, and I can recount the pieces of insight that you've shared. So rich. And obviously we're all coming together as Americans first and foremost, but we all come with our own unique backgrounds and stories. But this topic of American identity, to me, is sort of the fundamental question today of what it is that defines us. And if you just look at the past couple of weeks, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, I don't know if you saw his speech at the Claremont Institute recently, but it was really centered on these exact topics. I was just looking that up in preparation for this call, but he was putting forward a lot of the same kind of core concepts of how do we deal with cultural diversity and also religious diversity, cultural diversity, but also having that shared sense of what it means to be American and making sure that our identity can be above that at the higher level in a respect. So I'm really thrilled to join you guys for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. So Ibrahim, let me ask you then right off the bat, because I know both Will and I born here, native to United States, but you are somebody who immigrated to the United States. So when people talk about the American identity and what the American identity is and what does that mean to you as somebody who chose to come here and chose to make that part of your life? Because I think there's obviously a paradox there that a lot of people don't quite understand. Yes, we are all Americans, Will and I by birth, you by choice. So talk to me about the American identity and what that means to you and why that is so important to you.
Yeah, thank you. And just a note of gratitude and acknowledgement to Brave Angels, which has truly been this welcoming, not only welcoming, but really well-functioning home at this moment of intense effort to retell the story of this country and who we are and what, as a country, as a society, we have stood for and we should be standing for moving forward, what we want to leave to our children. And more particularly into my story, yes, I was born and raised overseas and spent my formative years away from the US, though I was always very closely exposed because I was fortunate to have a large cohort of American teachers at my school and as a teenager. And after those years, basically, I don't think I had any week without something connected to or from or related to the United States in my professional role as in nonprofit work and frequently visiting the US and also studying here in the past as an international student. But this story is unique, so it's like fingers. They're all fingers, but they have all their unique fingerprints. I think my story is one. So it's just the story of another individual who, as you said, chooses this country as his home, and to a very large number of countries in the world, this whole idea of adopting that country as your home is a lot of technicalities. It's a matter of technicalities. It's not a matter of story or identity. Even if that happens, that happens in multiple generations. Not in the case of the United States. It is this living contract, way beyond technicalities, and that you choose to be part of, to uphold, and to and you believe it. So, and as a reference to our larger conversations nowadays, that's one reason that immigration is part of the strength, the drive, this wonderful story of this country, and it's because of its such unique role, it has been part of the challenge. So that's again quite specific to very few countries, and to me, it means being part of this wider contract. Some part of it is codified, such as the Constitution, and some other parts of it is a civic creed. Mm-hmm. That's how I would put it. And Braver Angels, for example, has been very successful because it is helping people during this time of maybe soul search reconnect with that whole idea of civic creed of who we are.
Yeah. So talk to me then a little bit more about, and then I'll get your input on this, Will. But talk to me a little bit about you said a couple things like civic creed and living contract that really I would just love to know, when you talk about things like that, what does that mean, and how what is our responsibility as native born Americans in that, and then what is your responsibility as somebody who's come to this country to be part of that?
Yeah, this idea of living contract, of course, we can have multiple versions of wording it and approaching it, but the founding fathers, in my understanding, highlighted a vision that in practice was trusted to people to be traveled towards constantly. That's why it's a living contract. It's been reinterpreted and retold almost by every generation. And like, speaking of Americans' religious history, I remember hearing a comment where it was primarily Protestants who started the country, and then those who came protested them, and those who came afterwards protested them. But speaking of the larger public sphere, it was this living contract. And I'll quote Alex de Tocqueville, maybe not in an exactly worded form, but he says the greatest strength of Americans is their ability and willingness to face their shortcomings, to encounter their shortcomings. That has been just such a profound part of this story. So, and that should also mean, if we are talking about a living contract, a sense of continuity together with a sense of connection. So our search, in my opinion, should not mean just adventurous disconnection with the story. This is our story, with ups and downs, with moments that we can be proud of, and with other moments that we cannot. But that's how I think it has evolved, and it should be evolving. Just we should be traveling with this sense of incompleteness, and which I believe, again, has been this productive cycle since the time of the founding fathers. And with the living creed, I'm referring to maybe less contractual but more relational parts of it. That this sense of peoplehood that's beyond mechanics, and it did exist. This country wouldn't have been around if that didn't exist.
Right. No, and Will, so when we think about that living contract, that America is a constantly evolving thing, and we are constantly working through new challenges, or being willing to step up and accept our problems and work through those together. So talk to me a little bit about how you see that in terms of the civic creed and what we are trying to do here that is fairly uniquely American.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to actually something that Ibrahim said, just as we were kind of talking through the idea of this, is that we have to make this work, and we do make this work. So I think that there's a fundamental optimism and sense of we rise to our challenges, whatever those are, as a country, and we find our way through. And to me, that's a fundamental American spirit, right? Like, we're going to be able to get through whatever the challenges are now today with polarization. I always say we don't choose. No American generation has ever sat down and chosen the challenges that it's confronting, but always we've risen to them. And that goes back to beating the biggest empire in the world at our founding, the Revolution, to the Civil War, and to the defining wars of the 20th century, and every other social movement that's come through. We find our way through. And I think that is a kind of an attitude that we have to maintain, and making sure that we can find the productive ways to do that. The way we have to do that is to talk to each other and to be able to have these direct conversations about important topics, so we're able to chart the right course. But when I think about Wilk, this question of American civics and the civic contract that we have, and then also the founding ideals of the country with the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. Those are ones where, to me, when we talk about our challenges, I think that one of our greatest challenges is that we're not as grounded in those as we need to be. We don't have as much of a sense of that grounding civic education, if you will, that allows us to be confident in what we are. And when you lack a confidence from that knowledge, I think things can go off the rails. So I think part of the challenge that we have to do today is also ground ourselves so that we have that shared understanding of what the civic culture needs to be and how we can set that forward. And to me, that's part of this conversation here, is that we all need to reassert and engage as much as we can to help us unpack that, so we can come to that shared understanding of what the civic obligations are that we have, and so forth.
So I have a question for both of you then. So when we think about those obligations and what we as Americans, which I think we all agree this thing that we have in America is pretty unique to the United States of America. So when we think about those things, what are our obligations then? And I'll start with you, Will. When we see that a lot of times today, especially in the more populist era and the things where our politics seem to go by the whims of whoever seems to be in office at the time, what are our obligations as a citizen when it comes to this civic creed or this civic contract? Just, Will, talk about that real quick for me, and then I want to turn that question over to Ibrahim.
So I think that we need to keep a focus on, we all have our own personal stories and our personal identities, which are unique to us. Like nobody else, just as Ibrahim said, it's a fingerprint. We're each our own fingerprint. And that goes back to our stories, our families, our histories, how we got to where we are. And we take pride in those. That's integral to our identity. And we each have those. And that individualism, I think, is fundamental to this country. We're free to choose what we want to do and how we want to live and how we want to pursue our happiness. I think also we need to keep in mind that that's the personal level, but we also have to have the higher level, which is the thing that the glue that binds us. And I think that that's formed, to go back, Wilk, to your concept of subsidiarity, that's formed at the basic level in the family, where we have there's shared expectations in any family that you live in, and then up to the community, and then up to the nation, and then perhaps even at some level on a level above that, which is a little bit more nebulous, which is a civilizational level. And so we need to kind of be aware of what are those things that ground us and hold us together. And for me, the founding documents, the Constitution, these principles that we live by, those are gifts to us. And those are things that hold us all together. We have to learn to love them and learn to know them. And to me, that's the thing that will bind us all together, which is the really formal contract that we have together, to understand that so it can live through us.
Sure. And Ibrahim, what would you say that our obligations as individuals are within that civic contract, and how that works for you?
I'll quote Benjamin Franklin this time. So after the Continental Committee, was that the committee
Congress?
That prepared? Yeah,
Continental Congress.
And he was asked, so what happened? So did you start what did you achieve? What did you come out with? Mm-hmm. He said, a republic if you can keep it. Mm-hmm. So this, we spoke about this country's ability to look at the mirror courageously. This is, of course, we are not the government is not a church, but this strength borrows a lot from this concept of repentance, and it's this concept applied into public sphere in a very productive form, and seeing your shortcomings and struggling to address them. And for this particular question, there might be multiple answers. It's really a 360 thing, but I want to talk about this idea of, similar to Will's point, those foundational liberties, particularly the First Amendment. So again, in a religious, with some religious flavor, we can say that God does not cancel, and we should be able to maintain this maximalist, profound, open way of understanding what First Amendment means. Mm-hmm. This, on the paper, it's of course a legal, binding, constitutional statement, but its repercussions is way beyond that. If you want to see cutting-edge articles being published and generated, uphold that principle. If you want to see scientific advance, uphold that principle, maintain, and don't even let even the smallest dent being opened into First Amendment. If you want to see quality art coming out from our country, and if you want to see more smiles on the street, I think even that, maybe not immediately, visibly, directly, but even that is connected to really very jealously upholding our First Amendment.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. So with that, then, Ibrahim, because I know in your past from speaking with you before, you've lived in places. You've come from a background of living in places where there was persecution, and whether it be religious persecution or being persecuted for what you've said, or cultural differences and things like that. So let's take our conversation then into how that worked for you, how those things were a part of your past, and how they became the catalyst for you ultimately moving your family here and establishing a life here. So there really is a huge importance to the concept of religious pluralism, cultural pluralism, and this was the place you chose to find that and expand upon that for your family. So let's kind of transition our conversation there, and then I'd welcome Will's feedback on how that works and how he sees that. So talk to us a little bit about that, Ibrahim. Religious pluralism, cultural pluralism, and what about America made those things heavy for you?
I was blessed to be involved I was born and raised in Turkey, grew up in Istanbul, and I was blessed to be involved with as full-time staff and in several roles at the Journalists and Writers Foundation, which was modern Turkey's first publicly visible, registered interfaith platform that emerged in mid-90s. And I joined, of course, maybe a decade later. And up until that moment, this notion and understanding towards non-Muslim minorities had really a huge baggage of medieval and early modern political struggles and times of colonization and imperial competitions and rivalry. So those minorities, predominantly Christian and Jewish minorities, were looked through those multiple lenses of historical baggage, which created a climate of suspicion and denial and skepticism towards those people. So it was really a very securitized way of looking at religious diversity. And then the foundation emerged and took very courageous steps, bringing together those people around the iftar table to celebrate Ramadan. So it really shifted the way of people's looking at it. And many people started saying that, well, these are just as we are inherently belonging people of the same country. And in fact, many of them were here before we were even here. So it really started shifting these terms and then became nearly a mainstream way of thinking for quite a long time. But that maybe wasn't maintained ideally. And then there was a change of political climate. And this time there were political ambitions to bring a religious flavor into the country's identity and kind of sort of what people in the Western Academy especially have called kind of a political Islam. Islam as a political doctrine rather than as a matter of choice and faith. And I was among a cohort of people who opposed this idea, and that's why we ended up being persecuted and eventually displaced. But this is my immediate personal example, and I'll give you a larger observation. So as I was growing up in Turkey in 90s, that was a time of aggressive secularism. And when Turkish students were coming to the United States to study, they were amazed with the religious freedom they were given to perform their religious obligations, for the girls to be able to cover their head, and this not being even an issue. During the same decade, when students from Iran were coming to the United States, they were amazed with the freedom to uncover their heads. So two neighboring countries, Muslim majority countries, one was applying an aggressive form of secularism in total disrespect of personal liberty. The other one was executing an aggressive form of theocracy, again, with total disregard of individual will. And these people were coming to the same country, and one was celebrating the ability to observe freedom, and the other one was celebrating the ability to not to be imposed with religious practices. So, and that's the United States. This whole idea of separation, very carefully crafted, and of course, no human machine is perfect, but maintained in an exemplary form that can still inspire many corners of the world.
So, Will, as you're listening to this, and there's, I hear this story, and it definitely, it as an American, somebody who was born here, who has not experienced those types of things, I also know that I've seen a lot of people within our country that are skeptical when we start talking about terms like religious pluralism, cultural pluralism, bringing in migrants from regions that were experiencing theocratic dictatorships and things like that. Talk to me about your reaction to the persecution that Ibrahim and his family have experienced, and then what you see going on in America today in terms of that, and what that skepticism is rooted in, or what you believe that skepticism might be rooted in.
Sure. So going back to, I spent a lot of time in Wisconsin growing up for Thanksgiving. We always did our Thanksgiving at my grandma's house. And my grandma always had this expression. She had a lot of expressions, but she had this one expression that was that house guests are like fish. They start to smell after 3 days. And you could look at that. And I was a house guest every year at Thanksgiving. It's like, do you mean me? But it was.
I gotta get out of here.
But I think that there's some wisdom into that when you think about the word to host. And I know that this is something just from the bit that I've studied of Islam, for example. Hosting is it's almost a sacred concept in terms of how you treat your guests and so forth. There's a lot of honor in it. But if you just look at the etymology, the history of that word to host, it has the same root as hostile and the same root as hostage. And there's an element to what is it that makes that your guests start to smell after 3 days? And I think that ultimately it comes back to people are different. So when you're running a household, again, the norms of behavior, the expectations that you have, those are set in the household. Everyone adheres to that. As soon as you open that up, even within your own community, and you start to bring people into it, all of a sudden you're confronting people that are going to be functioning differently. And those differences create friction. And so if you take your concept of subsidiarity and you extrapolate that up to the community level, up to the national level, I think that the cohesion that people experience are when there's a shared sense of behavioral norms, institutions, and so forth. And when there's too much friction there, it creates that tension. So on the other side of my family, they came to Ohio from southern Italy. And that would be, southern Italy is a little bit different from northern Italy. Southern Italy has got a lot of corruption. It's a very different culture. Warm. I get a lot of my sort of religious Catholic influence from the southern Italian of my side, but it's very different, and it has elements to it that are going to be more clannish and certainly with mafia and organized crime and so forth. And I can tell you that when the southern Italians came in, that's mostly where the Italian immigrants came from. They came for opportunity, and when they came to Ohio, my family, almost every week in the town that my great-grandfather settled in, there were KKK rallies on the main street. And they weren't protesting Black Americans. They were protesting Italian Americans coming in. And for my family, the rule was we want to become Madakan, American. That's how they said it, that we want to become a Madakan. So for us, we went through a process where assimilation process. We left the language behind. We worked as hard as we could. And I'm very grateful for that, because I'm a continuation of that legacy of assimilating. And for me, it's to ground myself in what these values are. But when I hear Ibrahim speaking about his experience in Turkey, and I think about sort of the tension that we're seeing right now, not just in the United States, I think we've done a better job being able to bring people in and incorporate people and making people feel from all over the world part of this project, the American project. It's amazing. I'm proud of it. But if you look across the West, and I would consider America to be founded on those Enlightenment Western principles, there is a lot of tension between Western societies and immigrants that are coming in from the Islamic world. And if I look across the whole of the Islamic world, there's 40 countries that are Muslim majority. And of those 40 countries, I think 3 or 4 we would consider to be democracies. Turkey is one of them. And obviously by Ibrahim's example of having to flee for persecution, the ones that are there, Indonesia, Morocco, Turkey, perhaps Malaysia, they're not exactly the model Western democracies either. So I think that this is a question of why is it that we're seeing that trend where there's across the Islamic world, there's a lockdown, a move toward political Islam, which then ends up stifling out the pluralism that we're describing. And how do we make sure that when we're doing an integration, and this is certainly true of the United States, but it's true everywhere, how can we ensure that as we're doing this, we make sure that doesn't happen? Because if I look in Europe at some of the stuff that's happening in Europe, I don't necessarily see a lot of success there. And it's something that we need to contend with and think about.
Oh, for sure. So Ibrahim, I'll just pose. I mean, that question can be best answered by you. Is so when we start to thinking about, or we start thinking about the skepticism that people have, and that friction that's caused by the cultural pluralism or the assimilation or things, or to Will's point, when we start to think about some of the countries that have had issues where things have not blended as well as people would have hoped, what do you suggest, or what I guess what's your reaction to that, and what do you think the solution is, or some solutions are to that particular problem, and how do we quell some of that skepticism?
Yeah, this has several layers. One that pertains to overseas of those home countries, if you will, and then it's what it means in the U.S. context. But in a larger sense, there are those structural issues that Muslim majority countries have been struggling with, and one of them, among several key issues, is what some have identified as theological deprivation. So there are mechanisms and methodologies and ways of reasoning in mainline Muslim scholarship that can enable you to address contemporary issues. And as the times change, you can re-employ those mechanisms and methodologies and come up with totally different new answers. There's this sense of flexibility, but this requires a public sphere where freedom of expression is guaranteed. When you look at the first 5 centuries of Islamic history, you'll see that it's characterized by this sense of freedom of expression, because more than 90% of scholars were not on government payroll. So let that sink in.
Yeah.
And there was a very strong sense of private ownership. It was really considered almost sacred, and power was used in a rather horizontal way rather than an absolute monarch sitting at the top. These 3 characteristics of divided power, strong business class, and freedom of expression characterize early Islamic centuries. So even at the person at the very top of the political mechanism is not a monarch. He's first among equals. He's like a chief clerk, but definitely not an absolute authority. So when you compare the institutional structures with the challenges today, many of those countries have gatekeeper institutions that control the debate. So that creates this, what people call the theological deprivation. And if you are not able to quickly respond with satisfying answers and approaches of the times to respond to the zeitgeist, if you will, then people will come up there with their makeshift responses and explanations. And many of them will be very reductionist. And some of those reductionists will be very exclusivist. And some of those exclusivist ideas will be even violent. So that's one important challenge in the current status quo that characterizes a large spectrum of those countries. And if you compare it, for example, to what we have in the United States, most of the best publications, in my opinion, about Islamic history and contemporary Muslim affairs, Muslim issues, nearly all of those publications are coming out from Western countries, because there is no gatekeeper to tell those Muslim majority authors and scholars to what to talk about, or more importantly, what not to talk about. And if you visit an American masjid, an American mosque, I find them to be much closer to original Islamic practices, for example, in terms of space allocation. Because especially young women who grow up in the United States refuse to pray in the basement. They are Americans. So they refuse to have the equal treatment, which is the original Islamic practice. It was the same room, just divided, not a better room for men and the falling apart space for women. But here in the US, because of this individualism and sense of liberty and personal agency, the Muslim women are more empowered. So as you see, it's more about institutions rather than identities. Those who uphold those well-serving institutions, who are successful in stating them and maintaining them, are in a better position. And this is not to underestimate the problems that may arise when people coming from Muslim majority countries encounter in the West upon their arrival those tensions. But because this is just one explanation, this conversation on theological deprivation is just one window into a larger discussion.
Ibrahim, if I could ask you, to me, and I think that we're all, just based on the conversation, we're all kind of have this alignment of this, we elevate our institutional liberties that were given through the Constitution, this freedom of speech, being able to have these ideas that's baked into what we are. I think that we're fortunate. I think in the world, in the West, we have that really ingrained into who we are. But what I see is a lack of confidence in those fundamental principles. This goes back to the civics education piece. To me, if you remove those building blocks, if you will, that foundation of the country, we don't have the country that we're dealing with an immigration problem right now, where we let 20 million people come in without any vetting and through the open border. But when you think about it, we're a country where 20 million people wanted to come. They traveled across the world to come. The building block of our success, of being able to build what we have, that so many people around the world clamor for, whether it's for liberty and freedom as Ibrahim has, or it's for economic opportunity, it comes back to that fundamental institutional basis. What do you think about our confidence in that? Because I think that we've degraded our sense of what is sacred and needs to be preserved in order to continue this forward. And we sort of treat everything with cultural relativism. Oh, okay, well, if it's coming from, in a way, it's almost the opposite. It's an inversion. It's to say what's coming from us is bad and everything else from the world is good. So let's embrace those things. And I think that we need to actually make a distinction to say, actually, what we have here is the best system that's ever been created. It's our engine of what drives us and creates the opportunity. What's your sense of our confidence level in that, and the importance of that to help us move forward and in the right way?
Well, my short answer is yes. We should be more confident in those foundations. And back to my earlier point of embracing tradition in a form of with also an equal level of ambition for renewal should be this productive cycle that we are engaged in. This idea of continuity, rootedness, but still yet openness. So that will maintain this sense of peoplehood that again goes beyond the legalistic mechanic elements of what immigration means, what citizenship means, especially for the United States. It's more than those legalistic and mechanic elements of the story. It's way more that. It's about peoplehood, so that we can avoid becoming a confederation of disconnected communities and modern or postmodern tribes. So on that front, I, as an observant Muslim who chose the United States as his home, who is here with his family and who is raising a kid with those ideas that are rooted in the story of this country, and living our more particularities in the meantime, I feel uncomfortable with this sort of adventurism, that the really ease, this extreme ease of sense of total departure and a sense of total dumping of the foundational elements of the story of this country. This, again, I call it a form of adventurism, but we need an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
Without an anchor, this profound openness and welcoming character that is testified across the story of the U.S. Will not be a strength without an anchor.
Yep.
There should be
Yep.
something
Yep.
that binds us around this sense of peoplehood, and I think that will not make anyone compromise from feeling who they are and their sense of attachment to their roots, their cultures, their faiths. It's not an either or thing, but I agree that we should be more appreciative of the treasure we are sitting on.
Yes.
Yeah. So that actually goes to a question that I was just thinking about as you were saying that, and I think you kind of answered it, but I want to dive into that just a little bit more as we get close to the end of our time, guys. The idea of, is it possible then, Ibrahim, you talked about an anchor or getting people to understand what a treasure that we're sitting on. Is it possible, and this is the question that it keeps on coming back to for me, and I know that I've heard other people say that, is there a way to kind of promote that cultural pluralism and people of the Muslim faith bring to the United States, but also then increase some of that confidence that Will was talking about, decrease that skepticism that people have? I mean, we talk about things that were happening back in the earlier 1900s, let's say, when there was mass immigration from the Irish or the Italians and things like that, and how those families really pushed for that assimilation and in future generations. And now that cultural assimilation, while there's still a cultural piece from those people in the background of those families, they are uniquely American now. Is there a way, Ibrahim, to keep that anchor in the Muslim faith, have that cultural pluralism, but also have a certain degree of assimilation where we are starting together or coming together in mutual appreciation of that treasure? I'll get both of your guys' answers on that, and then we'll probably be just about to the end of our time. Man, this is going fast.
Yeah, this to a great extent, it's unfortunately maybe immediately not visible, but to a sizable extent, to a great extent, this is already happening. This is impossible not to happen. Thinking of the cycles of immigration and how communities take shape and feel more grounded in their American identity. That's how this has happened. So this is already happening and maybe needs more visibility. And on the other hand, there is also this maybe not the way we want to be, but that element that pertains to our human nature, that everything new, every newcomer, every unknown is, at least for the first encounter, gives you a sense of uncertainty and fear, and maybe even sometimes to some a sense of dislike. So there is this really very primordial human element that's not easy to eliminate. And nearly every community, as Will was sharing his family story, went through this in some form. But speaking of the Muslim American experience that I've been trying to observe over the last 6 years, I've been living in the US. This is already happening, and especially with one generation to the other. But as I told you, there are these certain, not dominant, but still inherited elements that the poor institutional structures of home countries created, not the faith itself. And as people travel, people with their entire mental repertoire. They take it to wherever they go. So this is one reality. And as I said, like this whole idea of mosque spaces, go observe them. They don't look the way they used to look a decade or two ago when you look at the women's role, for example. And this is happening in this country, and the credit, part of the credit at least, goes to the United States, because it's enabling that egalitarian structure.
Very good. Very good. And Will, same question. Do you think that there is a way to do this and build out upon the confidence, decrease that skepticism, maintain a certain amount of cultural pluralism while also promoting some assimilation? What are you seeing? What are you thinking right now?
I think that I think we have a lack of confidence right now. I think that pressure that my family experienced in Ohio to assimilate, I think that comes from, that is in some ways, even though that's something that was negative toward my family, in some way that pressure might have been necessary to help my family assimilate and become what we are today, which is proud Americans across the board. So I think that we need to find a way to be confident in what we are and being able to identify that these are the foundational pieces and doing things exactly like we're doing right now, talking about them. What are the values that are remarkable? There's a line in Ecclesiastes that's very famous, that there's a time for everything, a season for everything, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to tear down, a time to build, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And I think that this is a time to build, to rebuild, to remember. And one of the things that's in my mind is that when you think about Western civilization, it died. It was forgotten. So you had the whole idea of the Renaissance in the 1400s or 14th century in Florence. That was a reimagination of these concepts that had been carried for a long time before with the Romans and the Greeks. They were rediscovered. And what's remarkable, and maybe Ibrahim, this goes back to your point about early Islam, is that a big reason that we were able to have this rediscovery of these Western ideas that had died or had been forgotten were the great libraries. So Catholic monks, a few Catholic monks maintained great libraries that preserved the information. And then also in the Islamic world, in Baghdad, in Toledo, all of the ancient Roman and Greek texts had been translated into Arabic, and those became foundational for resurrecting that. And that line went directly into the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment was what birthed the United States. So we have this incredible treasure, as Ibrahim said. We need to remember it. We need to ground ourselves in it. And I think that if we can do that, we have a more hopeful shot of continuing to do what we've always done, which is to take the challenges that have been too difficult for others and make them American and overcome them.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. So as we wrap up our time here, I think we covered a lot of ground in a fairly short amount of time, but and I know I've taken a lot away from this conversation. Why don't you each give me a minute of parting words? We'll start with you, Will, and take a minute to talk about what you've taken away from this conversation, and then Ibrahim will give you the final word on that, and then we'll wrap this one up.
Well, thank you, Wilk, and thank you, Ibrahim. This has been a great conversation, and I'm so glad we were able to do it. I think the first thing and only thing that I want to just say is to thank you to Braver Angels, because Braver Angels has created a space where Ibrahim and I can come together and share ideas. And I think that that's something very special and unique that Braver Angels does, is it creates that civic forum where people can come together and meet each other as people, as Americans, and be able to have and facilitate these types of exchanges, which blossomed here into a podcast. So I'm very grateful for both of you and for Braver Angels, which is sort of the initiating drive of all of it.
Mm-hmm. Likewise, I really appreciate the opportunity, Wilk, for hosting us and at this conversation. And so delighted to be part of it. This is a very special time. I don't think we've had a shortage of special moments in looking at the history, but this is a very important time, and these platforms are fulfilling really a profoundly important role. And since my first encounter with Brave Angels and meeting wonderful friends and colleagues like the two of you over there, it's been an integral part of the personal story I shared earlier, and I look forward to being part of that endeavor and truly appreciate its value.
This has been absolutely wonderful, guys. Thank you so very much. And Braver Angels is such an important thing. And as we near that 250-year mark in this country, religious pluralism, cultural pluralism, how we can all do better in this thing, this uniquely American thing that we have, I think it's hugely important that we continue to have conversations like this, because the worst thing that we can do is just leave things unsaid, leave things unknown, allow our ignorance on topics to become fear of those other people. And when we do that, that fear then turns into anger and then hate, and then that's how we get to the violence. So the real solution here is to have these conversations. Obviously, we all love the organization Braver Angels. That is where we can make these great things happen. It's given us a platform and given us an avenue to meet each other. And I just encourage everybody to check that out, share braverangels.org, find out how you can become part of the solution, have conversations like this. It's been wonderful, guys. Ibrahim, Anli, Will Harwood, thank you so much for joining me on the Derate The Hate podcast. I do appreciate you greatly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate The Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.